Hello and welcome to my studio. In this video I'm going to show you how I made this picture. Sometimes with lighting equipment, less is more. The correct technique can make far more difference to a shot than the equipment used. This picture was created with a single small flash and a modifier made from cardboard. And in this video I'm going to show you exactly how I did it. Okay, so I'm going to start with the base. So what I'm going to use is a piece of white perspex or acrylic. This is literally an offcut. So I'm just going to place that on here. And we'll just give it a little bit of a clean. Acrylic tends to pick up all sorts of dust quite easily. So it's a good idea to try and keep it as clean as you can. Here we go. So on this I'm going to place the subject, which in this case are some strawberries. There we are. So I'll just place those around there somewhere. Okay, we might need to rearrange those a little bit later. But that's it for the subject. So the next thing to do would be to place a tripod. Now you will need a tripod to do this because with relatively close-up subjects you do need a lot of control. This particular tripod has a geared head and a geared center column, so it's easy to be precise with the positioning. Okay, so on here I'm going to place my camera, and I'm using this medium format camera with an 80mm standard lens on the front of it. Now if you're using a full frame, the equivalent of that would be about a 50mm. But I'm using this because one, it's very modular, and two, it's more or less generic. If I show the techniques with this, then you should be able to apply it to whichever camera make and type that you're using. Okay, so I'm just going to place this on the top of the tripod here. There we are. Now I mentioned that the camera was modular. What I'm going to do is just swap out the viewfinder. Now this has a prism viewfinder on it at the moment, but being completely modular I can just lift this off and swap it out for a waist level viewfinder. And for this type of work this is going to be a lot easier for me to do. So if your camera has a flip out screen, that's a good compromise to use instead of having something with a waist level finder on it. So this is the waist level finder, and I'll just place that on there like so. There we are. Okay, so we'll place this back in position, and I'm now going to tether this into Capture One software so it's easy to see the results as we go along. There we are, that's all connected now, so you should be able to see that these are the settings that I have on the camera at the moment. So it's in full manual mode. I have a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second, which is the flash sync speed for that camera, ISO 100, and at the moment I've got an aperture set of f11. So just with those settings and without doing anything else, what I'm going to do is just capture an image just to make sure that I don't get too much contamination from the house lights. Okay. There we are, and you can see from that that it's a virtually black picture, which is exactly what we want. So any light that I now add will be the only light which actually affects the subject. Okay, so the next thing to do will be just to line up the shot. So just looking at the image in the viewfinder here, I can just swing this down about there. Then I can just use the autofocus on the camera here just to get me in the right ballpark. Okay, so with that set, the next thing to do would be to set up a light. Now the normal way to light something like this would be just to put a rather large softbox right across the top. So to start with, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I've put in place this C-stand, and on the end of the C-stand I'm just going to place this very small flash head. Now you could use a speedlight for this, a flash gun. You don't need a great deal of energy at all. So on the end of this, I'm going to place that softbox. There we are. Now I'm going to need to raise that up in the air a bit more. Something like that. There we are. And I'll just turn that on. Okay, so just at an arbitrary energy level, what I'm going to do now is just grab an image and just see what we get. Okay, so we can see in here it's probably a couple of stops under in terms of the exposure. So what I can do is just address that to start with, and then we'll talk about the image. Right, so I'll just turn the exposure up on that head by 2 stops. There we go. We'll just grab that again. Right, that's more like it. So you can see in this image that we're getting reasonable exposure, but the lighting is particularly bland. If you look at the shadow underneath, if I just zoom all the way in, there is hardly any shadow in there at all, really. But overall, the image just isn't very punchy. And that's because this is a very big softbox, and it's just throwing light out everywhere. And being on a white background, that really isn't helping either. So we need to find a way that we can increase the contrast. And the easiest way to do that is just to dispense with the softbox. So that's what I'm going to do next. There we go. With that all gone, I can now just drop this back down again. And I'll drop it down a little more. And I can actually get it relatively close to the subject. And the closer I get it, the more the fall off will be due to the inverse square law. Therefore, I'm going to need to take some of that energy out. So I'll take those 2 stops off that I put on before. There we go. Okay, so that's not a bad guess. We've got some definition in the shadows now, possibly a little bright. So that exposure will suffice for the time being. We're probably going to change it anyway. So what I need to do is concentrate the light a little more than it is at the moment. And the easiest way to do that is with a snoot. And you can actually make one of those yourself, just out of some card. So in true fashion, here's one I made earlier. And it's basically just a piece of card which I've made into a cylinder and just attached with some gaffer tape. I'm just going to place that on the end of the flash, like so. There we are. Now the end of this is obviously quite a lot closer to the subject than I was before, so we'll have to see how that looks. Okay, so the next thing to do would be to address the exposure, so I'm just going to take off maybe a stop. We'll start with taking off just 1 stop. There we go. Well, that's really started to take effect now. We can see the cardboard snoot at the top of the image here, but I don't really think that matters. But the positioning of all this does matter quite a lot. I've got a little bit too much of the reflection here, I think. So what I want to do is just move the light a little bit further forwards. And by a little bit, I do mean that. It's very delicate. So we'll just move it ever so slightly forwards, like that. So with that now done, I'll have another go. There, that seems to have made the right amount of difference. So this is what I had before, and this is what I've got now. So I'll just zoom all the way in and we'll just check the focus. And yeah, that looks okay to me. So for capturing the image, that's it. So just a very simple piece of cardboard and a flash head. You can easily use a speedlight for this. There's very little energy involved. You can end up with quite a dramatic image. So what I'm going to do now is just take that into Photoshop and just do some post-production. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop and I've loaded up the file of the image I captured earlier. So the first thing to do, as always, is just to make a duplicate of this, so I can edit the duplicate and leave the camera original alone. That will give me some redundancy. So I'll just go onto the background layer here and right click the mouse, just ask for a duplicate layer, but I want a new document. I will just call this strawberries. Okay, so there we are. Photoshop has made me a new document and called it strawberries, so I can now just dispense with the camera original. And I've always got that to go back to. Right, so the first thing I want to do is just make a crop of this image so that I know what I'm dealing with in terms of retouching bits out that I don't need. So I'm going to just use the crop tool, and I've set a ratio of 16:9 as I'll be using this for video. I'm just going to bring the edges in ever so slightly, just make sure everything is centered the way I want. And there we are, that's my image now cropped down to size. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is just to zoom all the way in. So if I just use Control and number 1, that will give me a 1:1 ratio, and by holding down the space bar I can move around the image. At the bottom here you can see that there are 1 or 2 little bits of strawberry which have dropped off, which just make it a little untidy. So I'm just going to retouch these bits out. So the easiest way to do that is just with the spot healing brush. So we'll just make sure it's about the right size and it's as soft as it will go. Okay. So I'll just spot these out. So having done that, I will just zoom out ever so slightly just to make sure there are no others. Yeah, that looks all good to me. So by using Control and 0, I can go to a fit to screen. Okay, so the next thing to do is just to get rid of this bit at the top here. And the way I'm going to do that, since it's on a black background, is just with a black paintbrush. So I'll make sure that black is selected as the foreground color. Grab a paintbrush, and we'll just make sure that's the right sort of size. There we are, and again very soft. And literally just paint that away. And there we have it. So by employing technique instead of equipment, I've ended up with what I think is a very nice still life study of these strawberries. And the lighting has added greatly to the impact of the image. And I think overall that's worked rather well. Okay, well I hope you enjoyed watching how I made that image, and if you like watching these sort of things, do click on the other images as they appear, and don't forget to subscribe. Oh, and hit the like button. Thank you very much for watching.